Welcome to Your Career Unscripted. I'm your host, Jane Bernhard. I will be interviewing business leaders and recent graduates on the different perspectives, strategies, challenges, and advice on building meaningful careers across different generations. There's no right way to build your career or live your life. And I'm so excited that this show is in collaboration with Texas Immersive Institute at the University of Texas. We hope to help you define success on your terms and not anyone else's. Our guest today is Julia Cabral Flavin. Julia is a product marketing leader at LinkedIn, where she's grown her career for over a decade. Julia started her career in finance before pivoting first into the tech industry, then into the marketing field. Today, Julia leads a team of marketers that cover well-known and loved consumer products within the LinkedIn app and launch new ventures for the company like games and AI-powered collaborative articles. In her spare time, Julia teaches spin classes at a local fitness studio where she loves pairing her love of music and mobility with empowering others to be healthier and happier. Hi, Julia. I am so excited to have you on the podcast. When I was thinking about who I wanted to have on the show, I wanted to have people who had really interesting and unique careers, but who were also very committed to helping people and giving back. We've talked previously. I think you are an incredibly kind and thoughtful person. I've also read all of your content on LinkedIn, and I've looked through your background, and I've seen that you've posted about giving free advice to college grads. You've shared your own career pivot, which is very unique. And so I'm honored to have you on the show. So thank you so much for being here.
You're so welcome. I'm excited to be here and hope I can be helpful to even just, one person who's trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I'm positive you will be. I want to start off at the beginning. So you graduated from Brown and you enter into the full-time workforce. I saw you posted on LinkedIn that when you graduated, you felt a bit confused, you had mixed emotions, and you had a job lined up. And so part of the purpose of this podcast is to help young people who are going through something similar feel less alone. I think it's very common for people to go into the abyss of work after school and not know what it's going to look like or feel confused. And so I'm just wondering if you can kind of talk through what you were feeling at the time and how that changed over time, and if there was a specific moment where you felt, okay, I found my footing.
Yeah, and I have been posting about this on LinkedIn, and anyone's welcome to follow me on LinkedIn and see what I've written about there. But yeah, I'll actually take you back a tiny bit further, which is when I first got to college. It was 2008. The economy was crashing, and I'm a very risk-averse and practical person. And so I sort of looked around and I said, okay, the economy is both interesting and kind of scary right now. So that could be a good thing for me to study. And then, if I go study economics, I can go get a good, safe job at a bank. That just to me, it felt like this very safe path that was interesting given what was going on in the world, but also, again, being practical and risk averse, it felt like that would get me on the right path for my career. I sort of saw that path, and then I kind of put blinders up to anything else and just kind of one foot in front of the other. I took my economics classes. I got an internship with Wells Fargo. I kind of liked that and thought it was interesting and good. So I just went back and did another internship with them. And then they gave me a return offer to come back after college. And again, being a safe and risk averse person, I was just like, okay, that'll give me this security and it'll be a good job that I can start my career with. As I went through senior year, I had a blast because I had a job lined up, no regrets there. But I think I started noticing my friends were, interviewing and getting matched with these other jobs that were a little bit more unique. I just started to realize that there's so much more out there than just being a finance person and working at a bank. That was kind of all I was really aware of when I was in college, but I think I was just naive to how many other jobs there are out there. So when I graduated, I think the tumultuous feelings were, one, I had such a blast in college and wasn't totally ready to move on. And two, feeling like, okay, I have this great thing lined up, presumably, but is that really going to be the right place for me? And just kind of a moment of, I should feel grateful that I have a good job lined up and everything's kind of all squared away, but just sort of wondering, is there something else out there that I could have or should have explored? So I think that was what was going on in my head. And I wanted to share that just because I I think it's easy to look at people who look like they've got it all together and just assume that they are completely confident and feel great about everything. And often there's more going on than you realize. So that was what was in my head then.
Yeah. So first, thank you for sharing that. I think people now are experiencing something similar with the economy. So I think it's something that people can relate to and hopefully feel less alone in.
Yeah.
If you could go back and tell that younger version of yourself something, the one that was maybe making the safer choice and then did make a stable choice and you ended up in such an amazing place. But I'm just wondering is there something you wish you had heard or something you would tell that version of yourself that maybe would have helped you feel more confident?
Yeah, I think the thing I would tell myself, and I do tell younger folks when I try to talk to them, is just careers are long. Your career is, I think, especially in that senior year of college, you get myopically focused on like, how am I going to get that first job that's going to set me up and be the launch pad for my career? But careers are really long and they take lots of twists and turns. And so just like a little bit of a message to myself to trust the process. Don't feel like you have to have it all figured out right away. Just get out there, get into the workforce and start learning things. The rest will follow. I think just trust the process. Careers are long. Take it one step at a time.
I love that advice. And I completely agree, especially as someone who's also majorly pivoted careers and didn't always have it figured out and still don't. I think it's good to know that there is always a journey. You're always going to be making these choices. So you might as well kind of enjoy it and breathe throughout. I'm curious to hear about your pivot, which is something you've written about and talked to me about. And it's very interesting. So you pivoted from being a financial analyst at both Wells Fargo and LinkedIn to product marketing at LinkedIn. Those are two very different functions.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about your journey of making that pivot and what inspired you to do that? And also how you knew to go to product marketing. Because I think sometimes people are in a function and they think, I'm not enjoying what I'm currently doing, but what else is out there and how would I even get there? I don't know what I want to do. So you both made a pivot and you figured out what you wanted to do and then you stayed in product marketing, which to me indicates that you really like it. So Just curious to hear about your experience doing all of that.
Yeah, so there's two pivots that happened actually. So the first was moving from finance and the finance industry into the tech industry. And so that happened after I'd been at my full-time job at Wells for about a year. And like I said, when I was in college, I was like naively unaware that other jobs existed outside of kind of the cookie cutter things they tell you in a career center, like, banking jobs, consulting jobs. If you're an engineer, you go work as an engineer. I was just kind of blind to the other things that existed. So I was at my job at Wells. I was doing well. I was actually enjoying the job. But frankly, all my friends were working in tech. I was back in the Bay Area, which is where I grew up. And I just sort of looked around and all of my friends seemed like they were just in a little bit of a more dynamic, younger environment. And again, I learned a ton at Wells and I have a lot of heart and love for the people I worked with and learned from. But the tech shiny object was real. So my first pivot was, how do I get myself out of banking and into tech? And the thing that I kept constant there was my title as a financial analyst. So I was a financial analyst at Wells, and then I landed a job at LinkedIn as a financial analyst. So that's always one piece of pivoting advice I give. Literally, if you think about a pivot, you're keeping one thing constant as other things are changing. So figure out what your pivot point is that you can keep constant. So that first pivot, it was about keeping my title consistent. And that got me from the banking industry into tech. I had maybe 2 years as a financial analyst at LinkedIn. Again, I liked my work. I liked the people I worked with. And ultimately, after maybe a year or so, sort of two things happened. One, our department had an offsite where our CFO brought in a panel of CFOs to kind of talk to us about that career path. And I just had this recognition that, wow, I don't want to be a CFO. If that's what's at the top of this career path and it really doesn't seem compelling to me, I probably need to make a shift or do something else. And then I got this really great advice from a mentor, which was, if you're feeling like you need to make a change in your job or something just doesn't feel right, just take a time at the end of every week to reflect on okay, what did I do last week? What are the things that really energized me? And what are the things that really depleted my energy? And so I just started paying attention week after week to the things that would energize me and deplete me. And the pattern that I noticed right away was that, like, I'm analytical and I like analytical things. And my finance job was 100% analytical. And there were two things that were very small parts of my week, but that had more of a creative outlet to it. Like I quite literally, I got to make one PowerPoint and present it at one meeting every week. It was something that took me 30 minutes out of the whole 40+ hour work week. And yet that was the only thing that was energizing me and bringing me joy. So to me, that told me my balance is off. I have too much analytical work. I need something more creative and I need something more people-centric. That understanding and intuition was enough to give me, the confidence to talk to my boss and say, hey, I actually think I probably need to move functions. Like, I don't think this path is for me. And she was great. She really was like, just look around at the other teams you work with and see which ones you think seem interesting, which that was such a lucky break to have a supportive manager that gave me that invitation. And so I looked around and it was truly just the product marketing team that I happened to work with. And they were like my cross-functional partners. The work that they seemed to do just really felt, it still had that analytical nature, but it was also really creative and very people-centric. And so guided by those three areas and wanting to find a job with more balance between them, I just this is where it was a leap of faith. I just sort of set my sights on product marketing and thought, I think that just sounds like it would be a better fit for me. I didn't really know the ins and outs of it or what it really was, but it felt like it would get me more balanced in that people centricity and creative role.
Such an inspiring story. And also just very brave to bring up to your manager that you didn't feel like what you were currently doing was a fit. Were you nervous to do that? Because I think sometimes people are afraid to bring that up because people will feel like their manager might think they're uncommitted or they're unhappy or they're worried that that conversation won't be great. But clearly you had a very kind and supportive manager. I'm just curious, when you thought about, okay, I'm going to bring this up to someone and tell them I want to do something different, were you nervous about that?
Definitely. And this is where I had the other big lucky break here is that working at LinkedIn, one of our pillars of our culture here is transformation. And we talk about that as transformation of the company, of the world, and of ourselves as employees. And so I am so lucky that is really baked into the culture here, because I think that was the thing that made me feel like it would be okay to have that conversation with my manager, just knowing that transformation was something that was valued internally. And people did tend to move from function to function. It was a little bit of not a total norm, but it wasn't super unusual to have people kind of move between functions. So again, I was definitely nervous, but I felt like the company culturally supported that. And that's what gave me the confidence to start the conversation. I will say now, being a manager and being on the other side, one thing I tell my team all the time is just that your manager can't read your mind. And so if there's something you want, whether it's more money or to try a new type of project, you can't keep that to yourself. You have to figure out a way to bring it up, because truly your manager can't read your mind and they can only help you navigate through the things that they know about. So that's just always my tip for people, especially those who are younger in their careers and still trying to kind of figure out how to have that good relationship with your manager.
I think that's an awesome piece of feedback, because I think people are often very tentative to be direct with their manager because they are afraid of how they're coming off. They want to be perceived in a certain way. But I love hearing that you want people to be direct and to tell you what they want. Otherwise, you won't know. One thing that's really clear when you're talking about both of the pivots that you made, and in reading some of what you've written about your pivots, is that you were very strategic about those pivots. And that's something that's very interesting and inspiring, because it means that people can map it out a bit. Even if you don't know exactly what the end game is, thinking about it intentionally is possible. You've demonstrated that. One thing that I saw that you had written about was that when you were in the finance role, you started taking on some product marketing projects. I imagine that one validated that product marketing was interesting to you. It also probably created a stronger relationship with that team. Can you talk about how you went about doing that? And if there's someone else who wanted to do something similar and they think, okay, there's this marketing team or a finance team and they're doing really interesting work, how do you suggest they approach integrating themselves into the team so that in the near future, they can figure out if that's something that they would want to do?
Yeah, totally. It's sort of like the next chapter of the pivot story. So after I talked to my boss and told her I was interested in pursuing potentially another function, looked around and kind of set my sights on product marketing. And I think the next thing I did was I just asked the manager of the product marketing team that I worked with, who I already had, a working relationship with. I just asked if he would have lunch with me. Again, culturally a very normal thing at LinkedIn. So you got to kind of read the room at your company, but lunch or coffee or, even just like a Zoom catch up with someone that you're interested in. People like to talk about themselves and what they do and what they're interested in. So if you just express interest in someone and what they do and just frame it as like, I just want to learn more about what you do and what your team does, I think that's a really natural opener that would work at a lot of different companies. So for me, it was the guy who ran the product marketing team. His name was Andrew. And I just sort of said, hey, Andrew, would love to have lunch sometime. I think I'm kind of interested in product marketing, but I don't really know that much about it. So would you be open to that? And he was, which was great. And so we had a nice lunch where he just asked me some questions and explained more about what product marketing is and what his team does. I think at that point, I sort of just said like, hey, well, if there's ever any side projects or things that you want to throw my way, I'd be interested in doing that. And I think the important thing there was, as you said, like that gave me some window of insight into what the work might be like. And I think that allowed me to add value to that team, which helped build my reputation with them and just got me to be a little bit closer to that team in general. Again, they already worked with me as a business partner, but it got me just more exposure to what they did and got them more exposure to me. And, I worked hard and tried to do a good job. And I think that just sort of built some reputational capital that I ended up being able to leverage later when a role opened up on the team and they invited me to interview for it. So that's sort of how that whole piece of it worked.
It's definitely a testament to your proactive outreach. And I think it's a good piece of advice that many young people can take, that if there's someone or something that you're interested in, people aren't unattainable. Just message them, ask them for time, ask them for lunch, ask them for advice. So I really appreciate you sharing that. I'm curious, once you stepped into the product marketing role, then you're in a completely different function. What were the challenges that you faced in, the first few months of making that pivot, and how did you overcome that and learn the function and find your footing after you had been there for a certain period of time?
Yeah. Again, that's where my pivoting advice of try to find things that you can keep constant when you're changing other things really came into play, because I ended up moving into the product marketing function, but I was still at the same company. I was still actually working on the same product. It's called Sales Navigator, and it's a LinkedIn product for salespeople. So I was working on the same product, which meant I knew the business model really well because I had been their finance partner, and I knew the people really well because it was all the same cross-functional partners. And I already had that trust established as someone who's a hard worker and who's shows up well and is easy to get along with and easy to work with, and had a baseline. And then what that meant was I really just needed to learn what product marketing work actually is. And that's where, again, I leveraged the relationships that I had already built with the people on the team, just got a lot of mentorship and on-the-job training from my managers. And truly, I think the work you do at your job, I think you learn on the job, especially in a function like marketing. So much of it can be learned on the job, and so much of it is specific to the company and the product that you work at. So I think the thing that really helped was that I, again, already knew the people in the business, and that gave me the foundation. And then I could just spend my extra time or my time, okay, what the heck does a product marketer do every day? And I really could just learn from modeling after my fellow teammates, my manager.
It sounds like people and mentors and relationships are very important to you and a cornerstone of your career. I'm also just driven by connection coming from the acting world. And we've talked about this previously, but I'm obsessed with LinkedIn. Do you feel like it being a social platform helps with that? Or do you feel like you also are just naturally someone who feels comfortable asking people questions? Because I think a big part of it is being willing to ask questions and be seen as someone who is new on the team and doesn't know everything, and you want to be proactive and ask those questions. So just curious where you've cultivated those relationship building skills and also that mentality.
Yeah, I do think relationship building is something, one, that's really valued at LinkedIn. I think because we started as a professional network, the value of relationships is kind of embedded into everything we do. And I do think it comes naturally to me, which is a nice sort of fit for me at the company. And it's so interesting because I would say, especially when I was younger, I was very shy about asking for what I wanted. I struggled to be direct. And if you'll entertain a kind of funny story. This was actually back when I was at Brown. I was in a dance rehearsal. I was a dancer at Brown. And the word came through that John Krasinski, Jim from The Office, was doing a speaking engagement in the same building that we were in. And he was like backstage getting ready to go on. And one of my fellow dancer friends was like, "Ooh, let's go find him and take a picture with him." I was like, he doesn't want to take a picture with these two random 20-year-old girls. Let's leave him alone. Why would he want to do that? And she just looked at me square in the eyes and said, "Julia, if you don't ask, you don't get." And that was a watershed moment for me because I just never really thought about it that way. And it's very simple, but the worst someone can tell you oftentimes is no. So if you don't ask, you don't get. And there's so much value in asking for what you want. And I think it really comes down to doing it in a way that's approachable and doesn't put too much pressure on the other person. So whether that's your manager or someone you're trying to learn from or someone you want to pick up a side project from, asking for what you want, but giving them an easy out and just approaching it in a way that doesn't put too much pressure on the situation. I think you can get a lot of value for yourself out of that. But yeah, not being afraid to ask sometimes is the first step.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that story. It's a great piece of advice. I also think that once you start asking, I think that people will realize how much other people want to help. Totally. And how much people want to do it proactively. Because people, I've had so many people help me, and that is why I'm doing this and why I want to pay that forward. I think that people, no matter how senior they are, so many people are incredibly kind and went through very similar struggles, and being brave enough to just ask, I think people will be surprised by the responses that they get. So part of the podcast is I want to help people understand what the different lives look like in different functions. Because I think sometimes when people are in school, they think they want to do something, but they don't actually know what it looks like or feels like to be in that role. I'm just curious if you can tell us a little bit about the differences in your day, in your skills, in your work-life balance, just in your lifestyle of being in the finance world versus the tech world, or being in the finance function versus being in the marketing function. I think it'll just help people who are trying to figure out where they want to go and perhaps have a generalized skill set, visualize what that could mean for them.
Yeah. Well, I think every job and every company is different. So part of, I think, what's so important is to just get into the workforce and start learning and figuring out what you do and don't like. And then doing that reflection of, okay, let me look back on my week. What really got me excited and what dragged me down, and how do you optimize toward more of those things that get you excited over time? But it's really hard to generalize across everything. A couple of things that I do notice and reflect on a lot. So a couple of distinguishing factors. I think one was being client facing. So my job at Wells Fargo, we had a book of clients and we were trying to help them close big debt deals. So we were client facing. And what that meant is if your client emails you, you need to get back to them right away because you are a service provider to your client. And those clients are external to the company and they are critical to the company making money. Being client facing is one pretty big differentiator. Whereas when I got to LinkedIn, I was still a financial analyst, but all of my clients were just internal stakeholders. And one thing I noticed was that because it wasn't literally a client, people weren't always as responsive. People weren't always kind of giving the internal relationships the same level of care and respect, timeliness that you would for a paying client. And so that's actually something I held on to when I moved from Wells to LinkedIn. I still treated my relationships as if they were clients. And so I have always tried to be someone who is responsive and resourceful and approaches any relationship with how can I help? And I think that's something that served me really well. That's something I tell my team is that I want them to be responsive and resourceful, because it's just like a small thing that I think people really value but won't tell you directly. So I think that that's one thing to think about. Like, do you want to be client facing, which means often you have to be more responsive and more timely, or are you more interested in being just like an internal stakeholder? But even then, I'd challenge you to still be responsive and resourceful, because I think that's a really good way to operate. The other big difference I noticed when I moved from finance into product marketing was just what I would call a weekly cadence. So my finance job at LinkedIn, we were responsible for pulling data and putting together a report that needed to be done every Monday by 10 a.m. And so that means you either do a little bit of work on Sunday, or you get up really early on Monday and like crank it all out. And then we had a few other key deliverables on Tuesday and Wednesday. But then the back half of the week was very chill. And every single week was basically the same. And so every Monday I'd like run my report, and then I'd, go to my big meetings and have my deliverables Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, I'd like catch my breath, take a breather. But it was every single week was the same. And that was something that I think got really taxing for me, was just feeling like every single week was going to be the same. Whereas in product marketing, often what I do on any given day is pretty different. And the deadlines are often sort of set by me, and I can kind of decide like, okay, I know I need to get this campaign out the door in the next 2 weeks, but I can figure out how to make my schedule kind of fit to that, but it's not the same level of weekly cadence. And I think people ask me a lot, what's your typical day like in product marketing? It's a lot of communication, whether it's like email or meetings, but every day is pretty different. It's really not so regimented. There's certain things that happen every single week, but no 2 days are exactly the same. So I think just to kind of summarize there, are you client facing or are you internal? That's a kind of big differentiator, I think. And then another one, is there a weekly cadence to this job that kind of dictates your schedule, or are you the one kind of dictating when things get done?
That's very helpful and actionable advice. I'm curious for people who are interviewing for jobs, since I imagine you've been on both sides of that.
Yeah.
Since every function, every team has a different lifestyle almost, your week looks entirely different. And what you just said, even just the workload can fluctuate more in some functions versus others. Are there any types of questions or things that candidates can think about to try and vet during the interview process, whether what the team's day-to-day looks like aligns with them? Because sometimes I feel like at the end of interviews, the candidate doesn't get as much time as they would like to ask those types of questions.
Yeah.
So you do have to be kind of strategic in how you ask them. You want to make sure that it still comes off as professional, but you do also want to have the autonomy to figure out if the lifestyle of the role aligns with what you want. So do you have any advice for people trying to vet that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If I were interviewing, I don't know if I would ask, what does a typical day look like? Because I think for a lot of roles, days look really different. I might like reframe it a bit more and be like, what does your like ideal day in product marketing look like? How would you break up your time? Like, would it be spent in meetings? What would be the things that you did that made it a really enjoyable day? Maybe trying to get someone to be more specific about like what a great day looks like. And then maybe if you're feeling brave, you could also ask like, what does a terrible day look like on this team? That might be a way to get at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's also very direct. And I think that can often be very helpful. To change the conversation a little bit, when I am looking at your LinkedIn, you've been promoted and then promoted and then promoted like 1,000 times, which is so impressive and interesting. And it's very clear that you're very strategic in your career in general. I'm just curious why you think you've been successful in moving upward. Was it your desire to take on more responsibility? Did you intentionally want to move into a leadership role? Did you meet people and have a mentor help you? I'm just curious why you think you've been successful, because it's very clear that you have been.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice of you. And it's like a little hard to diagnose your own way of going about things. But I will say, like, I don't think I was actually super strategic the whole time. I think I had a combination of following opportunities as they came up And I'm always envious of the people who are, I know what I want to be when I grow up and I know what my dream job is. And it took me a really long time to feel like I had a sense of that. And so I think I was more just following opportunities and doing that self-reflection to know when something felt right or not right, and then trying to optimize more toward the things that would take me more in that zone of doing things that felt right. So I wouldn't say I was completely strategic by any means. I think a lot of it has just worked out well. I actually just read this great post on LinkedIn about like what people can do to make it easy to promote them. And it was all about making sure that your boss trusts you and that your boss likes you, and not that you're best friends, but being someone who's easy to manage, who's trustworthy, who your boss knows is always going to make them look good. When it comes time to think about promotions, as a manager, I just think if you've positioned yourself as trustworthy, reliable, likable to your manager, like that is the easiest way to set yourself up for promotion after promotion. I think the other thing that I did, and I think is important, is I think I've tried to gravitate toward working on projects and initiatives that were important to the company. So I definitely at certain points sort of would say to like a manager or I guess my manager, hey, I see that this project over here is getting a lot of attention. I'd be interested in working on that. So again, I think being proactive, asking for what you want, I think the more you can attach yourself to the things that are important to maybe not the entire company, but even just your team within the company. And then if you set yourself up, do great work, be likable and trustworthy, I think that's a good recipe for kind of keeping yourself moving forward.
I think that's awesome advice. And it's also something people can do immediately, because I do think, even especially as there are so many layoffs in the tech space, trying to latch onto what is clearly very important and a priority at the company, I think is one way to position yourself optimally when the market is very tumultuous. I'm curious, as you've moved upward, when did you start to take on more of a leadership role, and how did you cultivate your own leadership philosophy? You mentioned you've had mentors. Was it people who kind of showed you how to lead, and how did you step into that?
Once I kind of got my feet planted in product marketing and was like, ooh, yes, this function is what I thought it was going to be. It feels like a good spot for me. I'm doing well, presumably, getting good performance reviews, et cetera. And I sort of said, like, okay, I've moved around horizontally a lot. Like, now I want to sort of plant my feet and try to grow up. And I think I pretty much always knew that I wanted to be a people manager. Again, I like people. I like mentoring people. I like advising people. And so that always appealed to me. So that was something I talked to my manager about kind of as soon as I would start to be eligible to go on a people management track. It was something I was really upfront about wanting to pursue. And my manager at the time, who ended up being my manager for 7 years, was an amazing manager. And basically, I learned 90% of my management and leadership from him. I think great advice that I've heard is just to think about all the managers and leaders that you've worked for and think about what are the things that the best ones have done, do more of those things, and then what are the things that the worst ones did that drove you crazy, and avoid doing those things. So just to give a quick example, my manager for many years was this guy, Ron Yee, who is really, really great at developing talent. And one question he would always ask is, if we're evaluating whether to do a project or not, he would always ask what happens if we don't do that? Which is a simple question to force people to think about, are they actually working on something that's high priority and impactful? Or is this just busy work that someone spun up? So just that simple question to get people to focus on impact is just one example of something that a great manager did that I try to emulate. And then I would say one of my worst managers would, if something went wrong, she was very quick to just kind of accuse and come down harshly on the team rather than just seeking to understand what went off the rails and what we could have done differently. And so just that kind of quick reaction to blame or punish was something that I really did not appreciate in an earlier manager. And so that's something I try to take from the best and then learn from the worst.
Yeah, it's almost like stealing little parts, like the ones you want to emulate, and then not taking on the ones you don't. So you had the same manager for 7 years. That First of all, you must have really enjoyed working with them. That is a very long time. You've also been at LinkedIn for over 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what has kept you there for so long? It's really interesting. And it's interesting that it's unique because I feel like generations are different with how long the average person stays at a company. I feel like so many younger generations are staying at companies for 1 or 2 years. And I think that can be a product of people trying out new things. It can also be a product of layoffs in the economy. And there are many different reasons for that. But you've been there for 10 years. Why?
Yeah, I know. And it's funny because when I took the job at LinkedIn, I thought, I'll probably be here 2 years. That was what was in my head because I think that was just sort of the conventional wisdom was you kind of want to put in 2 years between jobs. And certainly I think like I work with plenty of people who have kind of been in a place for 2 years and moved on and have done well and have had great careers. I think, again, for me, I've kind of gotten to have 5 different jobs at LinkedIn. I started as the finance analyst, moved to product marketing, and then I moved to a couple of different teams within product marketing. And then in the kind of last 5 years, I've just been able to grow in the organization, which means managing more and more parts of the business and more people. So I kind of just think that every time my learning curve has flattened out, there's been a new opportunity to keep me interested and keep me learning. And I'm just super grateful that LinkedIn is an amazing place to work. I genuinely don't think that you find that many companies that have a combination of good culture, work-life balance, reasonably good compensation, and are trying to do good in the world. So the fact that we have a platform of 1 billion people and we're trying to help match them with economic opportunity and jobs is something I just feel good about when I get up and come to work. And so I think that actually I'll sort of bring this back around to, I'm so glad that working at LinkedIn wasn't my first job out of college, because I think I would have taken for granted how good I have it here. I think it was working at, again, lots of love for Wells Fargo, but like working in a much more conservative, old school, we did not get free lunch, barely got free coffee. It was like a place without the perks that Silicon Valley's become known for. And I'm so glad that I started my career in that environment because I think it made me really grateful and appreciative for how good we have it here at LinkedIn. So even if there have been points where I've been frustrated or, maybe thought about looking elsewhere, I always know that I have it really good here. And it sounds a little bit cheesy to say, but I actually don't think the grass is greener in many ways. And so I think the jobs you have that aren't amazing will teach you a lot and will make you more grateful for the great jobs that you get down the line. So all of those experiences are super valuable.
I think that's extremely helpful, and I completely agree. I think people listening to this who are maybe in a position that doesn't feel like it's where they want to be for an extended period of time will hopefully hear that and think, okay, someone who has been very successful also experienced periods of frustration, and it led them to something that was a better fit down the line.
Totally.
So I hope it helps people think, okay, all of this is going to end up being something different anyways, and I can map out a different path for myself. It seems like mentors have played a very large role in your career and in your life. Do you have any advice for a young person who really needs mentorship and feels a bit lost, but doesn't know how to go about finding a mentor?
Mentors, I think people put a lot of pressure on the concept of finding a mentor. And I would think about it less as like, who is my mentor? And think about the people that you interact with at your company or in your life. And are there people that you really respect and admire that you want to learn from? And again, just reach out and see if they'll have coffee with you. Ask them if they're open to meeting on a semi-regular basis. You don't need to make it this intense thing of like, will you mentor me? Like, I actually think my best mentor was my manager for many years. And, he was my manager, not my mentor. But I think I just learned so much from him, and plenty of other people that I've learned from in the organization that I've just kind of really admired and then reached out to and made time to ask questions. So I think just identify the people that you admire for one reason or another, be proactive in reaching out to them. But then one critical thing is if you're going to do that and if you're going to set up a coffee chat or a lunch or something like that, like come with an agenda and even ideally tell them beforehand what you want to talk about. The most unfulfilling mentoring relationships when I've been the mentor with a mentee, or when they don't really tell you what they want to know from you, and then you kind of show up to the meeting or the coffee and they don't really have any questions for you, and it's just sort of like a where does this go from here? So like, do your homework, have some questions together, make them insightful, show that you kind of figured out who the person is and what they care about and how you can relate to them. But I think if you just express interest in people and reach out, you can get a lot of great learning and mentoring even in a less formal way.
I feel like proactive outreach is a theme of today, which I love. And also, people reach out to me all the time for advice on going to business school. And when people seem like, okay, I've looked at this person's background and it's a specific message and it feels like they've prepared and then they come to the conversation prepared with questions, you do feel much more invested because the person did their homework. And just to pivot the conversation a little bit, I've noticed that you've started putting out a lot of your own content, which is very interesting. It's something I only recently started doing and have found very, very fulfilling. But I'm curious, why did you start doing that? What motivated you to do that? What are your goals? And is it something you would recommend other people try as well?
Yeah. So again, I've worked at LinkedIn for nearly 11 years, and I've worked on different parts of the company, but I've worked on the LinkedIn feed and content creation for 5+ years. And the fact that it took me 4.5 years to get comfortable posting on LinkedIn is indicative, but something I wish I'd just taken the leap on sooner. Internally, and even, when we talk to people who post on LinkedIn, we do talk about LinkedIn as being a platform of generosity where you can give back to other people who want to learn from you in a pretty scalable way. And I think you talked about this before, but even the most senior executives who are busy and have all sorts of priorities and things going on in their lives generally really like giving back, and they have so much expertise to share. And so I think for a long time, I just sort of felt like what am I knowledgeable about? What can I share on LinkedIn that would be interesting or, meaningful to people? And there is this, on my team, we call it cringe mountain. There's this fear of putting yourself out there in a way that's cringe, especially on LinkedIn, because it can be so, like, a lot of people post really celebratory stuff. Like, I'm thrilled to announce da 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 da. So I think I was held back from doing that for a long time for fear of not having something interesting or helpful to share and not wanting to be cringe. And quite honestly, I think just as I've gotten older, I think I just care a little bit less about seeming cringe or what people are going to think of me. Like, I think as I've gotten older, I've cared less and less about that. And ultimately, my goal with what I put out on LinkedIn is I just want to give people a sense of who I am, so that someday, if someone wants to work for me, they can go to my profile and see who I am, what I care about, what I post about, get a sense of me and what I think. Or, if I'm meeting one-on-one with a new person who just joined LinkedIn, small talk can be terrible. If you just come and you're like, oh, in San Francisco, how's the weather there today? It gives people so much better fodder to say, hey, I went to your LinkedIn profile and your profile picture is you and a dog. What kind of dog do you have? I just think that you can use content on LinkedIn as a way to give people a sense of who you are. And someday they might want to hire you or work for you. Or maybe it's just the next time you meet up with a coworker who you don't know that well, you're giving them something to latch onto and start the conversation with. That's sort of what got me started. I will say, as I've posted more and more, I've just heard really wonderful feedback from people who your advice on pivoting was really helpful, or I had some colleagues from my Wells Fargo days who I hadn't talked to in ages who reached out and were like, hey, let's see what you're up to now. My little brother was like, hey, I read your article on career pivoting and I thought it was really helpful. It's like, so I think there's definitely a cringe factor you have to get over. But I think there's so much value in just putting yourself out there and sharing a little bit about who you are, what you care about, what you do, what you know about. And then I think, again, the feedback has kept me going.
I think that's extremely helpful and also something I relate to. I only recently started posting and publishing pieces. And even last week, I published a piece on CNN, and I was so nervous to do it because it was putting out my opinions into the world, and the same thing, thinking the cringe, what you're talking about and what will people think about this. But then I was surprised that I got a lot of really kind and thoughtful messages on LinkedIn that very much moved me and were so kind and people were so nice that I think people will be surprised about the impact of sharing their stories. And everyone's story matters. And everyone, even if someone is much younger and hasn't done anything yet, there's always someone younger than them that can benefit from what they're saying. And also across generations, someone who's recently graduating college, their experience would be very interesting to someone who's 60. So yeah, I think it's nice to hear, and I hope is validating for people that even people who are sharing have had moments where they felt nervous to do that. And so in terms of the content that you put out there, it seems like you're talking a lot about fulfillment, what a fulfilling career means to you, how to help other people find that. I also saw that you are a fitness instructor, which I imagine brings you fulfillment in a very different capacity.
Totally. Yeah.
I would love to hear about how that has added value to your life. I was a personal trainer for 7 years as my actor side job. So I've also been there, but I'm really curious to hear, why are you a fitness instructor? What do you get out of it? And how does it help you?
Yeah, so when I started posting content on LinkedIn, I was just like, okay, what are my jobs? I'm a tech marketer and I'm a fitness instructor and I like to mentor and manage people and I like to help people with career development. That's my content strategy. I just post stuff about that, which is very vague, but is who I am and what I care about. And specifically, I think the fitness instructor one, actually it's funny. I've been doing that for 7 years and I kind of hit it for the first 3 years. And I was actually talking with a career coach who I talk on and on about how the benefits of that. And I sort of admitted to her that like, well, I also have this side job where I teach spin classes every Friday. And she called me out and she was like, Julia, when you started talking about being a spin instructor, like your whole body language changed. Like clearly it's something you love doing. Like, why don't you share about that with your coworkers? I was worried that people would think I was just ditzy or like not dedicated to my corporate job or something. I don't know. I just had this weird worry about how people would perceive me. There it is again, for like doing this fitness side job. But again, this career coach was like, clearly you love it. And that's like an interesting detail that makes you special. You should share about that. And so after that conversation, I actually added it to my LinkedIn profile. I didn't have it on there beforehand because I was, again, just worried about how people would perceive me. But it's truly something that brings me so much joy and fulfillment. It's interesting because my corporate job at LinkedIn, like platform of 1 billion members, trying to match them with jobs so they can get economic opportunity, that is meaningful work. But every Friday I show up and I teach a class of 15 to 20 people. We, play music and ride our spin bikes for 45 minutes. And I know very viscerally that I've helped those 15 people start their Friday on a high energy note. They're going to leave feeling better. They've done something healthy for their bodies. I get so much joy out of knowing that I can impact someone's day in that way. And truly, I think the side hustle thing kind of gives me this alternate creative outlet. I make a playlist and I come up with choreography. That's a super creative outlet for me. And I think because I get that out of my side job, I kind of crave it less at my corporate job. If people are interested in fitness or have some sort of side hustle they've got their eye on, I'm always really enthusiastic about telling them to pursue it because I just think it can give you so much fulfillment, even if it's literally for me like an hour a week. But I think it sort of balances out my other job in a way that makes me more fulfilled in my work overall.
I love that. And it's awesome that you're motivated by so many different things. It also just makes you more human and multifaceted, and that people aren't just one thing. They don't have to just be a corporate job. They can do different things that they're passionate about. I also think whether or not someone is in a job that does fulfill them, if they can think of other things that do as well, whether it's that or playing an instrument, just something that brings them joy, that makes them feel very present, is a great thing to also do. This has been such an awesome conversation. I have one final question for you.
Sure. Okay.
So if you imagine yourself 10 years from now, if that version of you looks back on the past decade and you feel like you did everything you could to create a fulfilling career and a fulfilling life, how would you have spent your time and what milestones would you have accomplished?
That is such a hard question. I think if I keep going on the path that I'm on, I feel super, super fulfilled in my career and my life right now. I have an amazing job at LinkedIn that I love and really value. I have a great team that I've enjoyed like building and cultivating. I have my little side hustle that I, like I just said, get so much fulfillment out of. I have an amazing partner and husband and great friends and family that live nearby and 2 adorable dogs. So life is really good. I think continuing to grow in my main job and my side job and just kind of doing more of what I'm doing. And I think not losing sight of what brings you joy and makes you happy. I think as you mentioned, finding what fills you up and what brings you joy can come from work, it can come from outside of work. And so I think having a career where you have space to find fulfillment at work, but also outside of it. I think if I'm 10 years further down the line and still doing that, there's not like some big promotion or thing I've got my eye on. It's more about just continuing to navigate, continuing to find fulfillment in my work, building great teams, mentoring and managing people. Yeah, I think I am fulfilled. And so I just want to keep doing what I'm doing.
Well, I am very inspired by you and by your growth mindset and your thoughtfulness. I can't thank you enough for this conversation. I have a list of very specific people that I want to send this to. You're incredibly thoughtful. You're incredibly kind. It's very clear you would be an awesome mentor and that you genuinely care about helping other people. So thank you so much for being on this and for the time.
Of course. No, it was a great conversation. So I really appreciate you inviting me on.
Of course. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Your Career Unscripted. If something about this conversation inspired you, I'd love to know. Feel free to message me on LinkedIn at Jane Bernhard if there's a guest you'd want to hear from, or if there's a type of background you'd like to learn from, and I'll do my best to make it happen. If you enjoyed the content, please subscribe to my Substack and socials, follow Texas Immersive Institute, and check out TXI's Patreon at patreon.com/Texas Immersive for more thought leadership on the immersive field. And of course, please share the episodes with anyone who you think might find them helpful. See you next time.